Good morning and namaste to all of you. Let's start with the prayers. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasen Gratitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritvarshine Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayane Ham Tvam Anusandhame Bhagavata Gite Bhavadveshine Namo Astu Te Vyas Vishal Buddhe Full Arvind Ayat Patra Netar येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमया प्रदीपः प्रपन्न पारिजाताये तोत्र वेत्र एकपानये ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाय गीता अमृत तुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत् वसुदेव सुतं देवं कंस चानूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानंदं कृष्णं वंदे जगद्गुरुं भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्राहवती कृपेन वहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तने सोतीर्णा खलु पांडवैरन्नदी वर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलं गीता अर्थनधोटकं नानाख्यान केसरं हरिकथा संबोधन अबोधितम् लोके सज्जन षट्पदे रह रह पे पिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लंघ्यते गिरन् यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानंद माधवम् यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्ये स्तवे वेदे सांग पद क्रम उपनिषदे गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यानवस्थे तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुषुर असुर गणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. So last week we finished chapter 3, Karam Yog. And we did not get a chance to go through the conversation about it, or if you have any question or if you have your comment. So if anybody wants to do that before we start chapter 4, you can do that. But if you don't begin to chapter, so chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a continuation of chapter 3 actually. It just takes us one step up. So title of this chapter is Gyan Karam Sannyas Yoga. Okay, there's a Gyan word also, there's a Sannyas word also, and sure the Karam Yoga is here too. In the previous chapter we learned what the Karam Yoga is. See, Karam we all do, actions we all do. But when we do actions the way Lord Krishna told us to do the actions, it becomes a Karam Yoga. But he is such a guru, such an avatar, who wants to take us beyond that. That's why this chapter. Gyan and Sannyas also, both. This chapter is also intended to invoke in Arjun's mind a necessary amount of reverence and respect for his charioteer. That's why we will see that some of the statements made by Lord Krishna over here, where we see the aura of God descended upon this earth. And we saw that there was a lot of knowledge given in the second chapter also. And we all know that merely imparting knowledge to someone is not enough. The recipient of the knowledge must appreciate its value and have faith in its authenticity also. So that's why Lord Krishna over here, he is showing his divine aura to us also, to Arjuna also. Because when we know that it is coming from an authentic source, when we'll definitely put our effort to implement it practically. See, knowledge should not just to stay there in our brain only. That's a theoretical knowledge. So theoretical knowledge becomes a burden if it's not put into practical use. So we'll see that Lord Krishna, he is establishing a credibility and importance of the spiritual wisdom he is bestowing to Arjuna. We all know that God and the individual soul are both eternal. We have learned that. Even in the beginning of this great scripture and other scriptures also. And this science of yoga unites the soul with God. So this spark of eternal needs to go back to the total. And that's how we can make our actions into a yoga, Karam Yog. Lord Krishna states right in the beginning of this chapter that the knowledge of yoga, which he is revealing to Arjuna, is eternal. And it has been passed down from the ancient times through the descending process. How? From a guru to a disciple. So that's why the faith is needed. If there is no faith, then it doesn't work. So faith in the guru. That's how it just flows down. So let's look at what Lord Krishna is saying in the very first verse over here. He says, Imam vivastehe yogam proktvan aham avyam vivaswan manve praha manu ikshvakve abravit. Imam, this. So this means the knowledge which I have been giving it to you. Vivaste. That is to vivaswan. Another way scriptures talk about Vivaswan is sun god. Yogam, the science of yoga. Proktavan, taught. Aham, I, avyam, eternal or imperishable. Vivaswan, again that Vivaswan, the Rishi Vivaswan, who's also called the sun god, Manve, to Manu, Pra, taught, then Manu Ikshvake, to Ikshvaku, first king of the solar dynasty, Ikshvaku, Abravit, taught. So Lord Krishna is saying that I taught this imperishable yoga to Vivaswan. Vivaswan taught it to Manu, and Manu taught it to Ikshvaku. So Lord Krishna is making an open statement that what he has been saying so far is just a very intelligent reiteration of what is the content of the immortal Vedas. So he's declaring that he himself taught, very beginning of the creation, the knowledge of the Vedas to Vivaswan. And later on, Vivaswan taught it to Manu. Manu is a lawgiver in India, in that part of the country. This universal knowledge was in the Vedas, but that code of conduct, the lawgiver was Manu. And Manu in turn declared it to Ikshvaku. Who is Ikshvaku? The ancestor of the Surya Vansh, the solar dynasty. Solar dynasty ruled over Ayodhya for a long period of time. And Lord Ram was born in that family, that lineage. So you can see that how he is taking Arjun's mind in the past, and he says, this is not a new knowledge. And another thing you can see from here, that this knowledge was first taught to the rulers of the world. Vivaswan was a ruler, Manu was a ruler, well respected, and then Ikshvaku Vansh also the ruler for a long time. So the deep suggestion which is implied in this assertion is that cultural values of life can be revived in a country or in a place only when the leaders of that nation are culturally well established. Most of you have heard that statement, Yatha Raja, Tatha Praja. And Raja is not just a head of the nation, in every family also. Head of the family, the parents, whatever they do, the children, they follow. It's very important to practice what we want our children to be. So moral values can be forced upon a generation neither by law nor by force. They can be propagated by examples only. That's another thing we can read from this beautiful first verse. And all this knowledge we see, what he's telling us, that it is handed down from master to disciple. Okay, master to disciple. This Brahm Vidya, which we are talking about, which Lord Krishna is teaching us, it cannot be learned by ourselves from the books only, from a guru to disciple. So verse number 2, Evam parampara praptam imam raj rishya vidu sakalen ihmahata yoga nashtaha param tap. Evam means thus, parampara praptam, handed down as a tradition, like a continuous tradition, like a succession. Imam this Raj Rishya, the royal sages. Vidu, understood, knew. Sa means this, Kalen, with a long passage of time. Ih means here, Mahata, great. Yogaha, yoga. Nashtaha, lost, destroyed. Paramatap, that is Arjuna. This knowledge handed down thus in regular succession. The royal sages knew this yoga by long lapse of time has been lost here, O Paramtapa. So in other words, this knowledge, the yogic knowledge, the Vedic teachings, which he is trying to teach us, he says it was handed down in a regular succession among the royal sages. Okay, but right now he says, in that current period, we know that how the kings are acting. That was right in front of them. Because of that, this war was being waged, because they forgot these cultural values. So that's why he is saying that right now it has been destroyed. So some great masters from time to time, they appear, they inspire, they encourage, and they lead the generations away from this destruction. So Lord Krishna very rightly evaluates the period of Mahabharata actually. So he says the yoga by long lapse of time has been lost here. So that's why there's a need of reviving it again. Verse number 3. Sa ev ayam maya te agde yogaha prokta puratana bhagata asi me sakha cha iti rahasyam hi etat uttamam. So means that ev even ayam this maya by me. Te means to you. Adhe today. Yoga, yoga, proktaha has been taught or revealed. Puratana, ancient. Bhagta, devotee. Asi, you are. May my sakha, friend. Cha means and, iti means thus. Rahasyam, secret. He, certainly. Etat, this, uttamam, supreme. That same ancient yoga has been today taught to you by me. Why? Because you are my devotee and my friend. And this is a supreme secret. So what is a supreme secret? What he has taught. This knowledge is a supreme secret. So secret doesn't mean don't tell anybody. So secret means it is so subtle. It is so profound. The grosser intellect cannot comprehend it. Okay, so in that sense, it's a secret. So with a very direct statement, in the style of open confession, Lord Krishna is removing all possible misgivings of some orthodox understandings of the religion. Okay. So he says this is the same thing. Karam Yog is the same thing. Nothing other than the same ancient yoga. I'm not teaching you something new. Another thing we see in this verse is the relationship between a teacher and a disciple. It should not be according to the Vedic laws, it should not be a commercial arrangement. You pay and I'll teach. Okay. There has to be a warmer climate between the guru and the disciple. There has to be a love and freedom, friendship, and mutual understanding. Faith. Only then something like this can blossom in our heart and mind also. So Brahma Vidya, that's what we are learning. Gita is nothing other than Brahma Vidya. Rishi Vyasa has said that at the end of each chapter, it's a Brahma Vidya. Brahma Vidya Shastra. So he is telling Arjuna that this ancient science being imparted to him is an uncommonly known secret. See, we all know that there are some secrets in the world. There are two reasons we keep the secrets. One reason is selfishness. We want to keep it to ourselves only. Another reason is that we want to protect the abuse of the knowledge. But over here, the science of yoga remained a secret, not for either one of these reasons. Because it requires a qualification to be understood. That's why it's a secret. If we have this qualification, then we can understand it. And what is the qualification? In the second line, Lord Krishna is saying it very clearly. He says qualification is a devotion. Without a devotional heart, a person cannot grasp the message of Bhagavad Gita. Devotion is needed. And that's what he said, Bhagata asi me sakhacha iti. Because otherwise, intellectually, we can be very smart. So the intellect itself cannot make us understand this depth of knowledge. The Atma. Atma is not part of Prakriti, where intellect is part of the Prakriti. Atma is eternal, but intellect is finite. So this Atma or self is that which is beyond the intellect. That means it's beyond the reasoning capacity. So this reasoning capacity cannot understand the eternal, the changeless, the conscious principle, which is so subtle. Grosser cannot understand the subtle. So that is the secret he's talking about. But he says, if you have a devotion, because you do have a devotion, Arjun, you are a Bhagat, and you are Sakha also, very dear to me. And that's why I've been telling you this supreme secret. It's a beautiful verse, actually. If you look at it, we can draw a lot from this simple looking verse. Are we devotees? In order to be a devotee, we got to love God. Got to have a faith in God. More faith in God than anything else. More love for God than anybody else. Then we'll be a devotee, Bhagat. Very simple qualifications, but it takes time to cultivate those qualifications. Then Arjun now, he's listening. That's why I said this is the first time Lord Krishna is just revealing his divine nature to him. So Arjun, all of a sudden, his eyes are opened. He says, Aparam bhavata janam param janam vivastata katham etat vijaniyam tvam ado proktvan iti. Aparam, later. Bhavata, yours. Janam, birth. Param, prior. Janam, birth. Vivastha, the Vivaswan. So Arjun was, he knew the scriptures. He was well read. So that's why he said Vivaswan. How can you say Vivaswan? You taught it to Vivaswan. Katham, how? Etat, this. Vijaniyam. Am I to understand? Tvam, you. Adau, in the beginning. Proktvan, taught. Iti, thus. Arjun said, later was your birth. Prior was the birth of Vivaswan. How am I to understand that you taught this yoga in the beginning? So what he's saying, you were born much after Vivaswan. I see you standing right in front of me. And here you are declaring that I taught it to Vivaswan, the ancient. Because to Arjuna, the charioteer, the Krishna, had a definite date of birth. And it was his own contemporary. So how can he understand this? So he's puzzled. He's puzzled. So in order to remove this doubt, Lord Krishna says, Bahuni me vyatitani janmani tavcha Arjuna tane aham ved sarvani na tvam vetat paramatap. Bahuni, many. Me means my. Vyatitani, have passed away. Janmani, births. Tav means your. Cha means and. Arjuna. Tani, them. Aham, I, Ved, no, Sarvani, all. Na means not, Tvam means you, Vetat, no, Paramatap, Arjun. So Lord Krishna said, many births of mine have passed, as well as yours. Oh Arjun, I know them all, and you know them not. Oh Paramata. Okay. There is no accident for in all of our lives. Not a single mortal embodiment can be the result of sheer accident. Every person comes to this field of activity in this world, Karam Yoni, as a result of his or her evolutionary process. So there is an autobiography of the ego. We remember the autobiography of this lifetime, but there's an autobiography of our ego also. It's a long chain of existence after existence, different embodiments. Because of that, we are here presently. In each life, as soon as the ego expresses itself in its given field of activity, it forgets. Actually, fortunately, it forgets the entire past. So that's what he is telling Arjun, that you have forgotten, even though you have taken many lives too. But a master like Lord Krishna, because of his divine omniscience, understands that both he and Arjun had been through many lives, sometimes together, sometimes separately also. Because that's what he's emphasizing here, the difference between you and me. Even though we both have taken many births, you have forgotten, but I have not. This is the difference between a soul and a God. Soul and a God. Because even God, when he comes in a human body, still remains omniscient, unlike the individual souls. Because our knowledge is finite and we have forgotten the past. So that's why he says, I know them all while you know them not. Very clear statement he's making over here. So the only difference between them is that Lord knows what he is, while Arjun is under the veil of his own forgetfulness. There are many similarities also in the Supreme Soul God and the individual soul, us. Because both are Sat Chit Anand. See, just like a drop of water from the ocean, there are similarities also, but there are differences also. And what are the differences between God and us? God is all pervading, while the soul pervades only this body, which it inhabits. God is all powerful, while the soul does not even have the power to liberate itself from Maya without God's grace. That's why we look for grace of God. Even though soul is part of God, but it doesn't have that kind of a power to liberate itself by itself, from itself. God is the creator of the law of nature, while the soul is subject to these laws. God is the upholder of the entire creation, while the soul is upheld by him. God is all-knowing, while the soul does not have complete knowledge, even in one subject. Nobody can say that I know it all, because it keeps on changing. So even though we are spark of God, we are ansh of that anshi, but still there are differences. So we got to remember that. So in that sense, Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, you have taken many births, I have taken many births, you don't know them all, and I know them all. Isn't it a beautiful verse? Then he says, Aja api san avyatma, bhuta nam ishvara api san, prakritim swam adhishthai, sambhavami atam maya. Aja, aja means unborn. See, ja means born, ja means unborn. Api means also, sun means being. Avyatmaha, of imperishable nature. Bhutanam, of beings. Ishvara, the Lord. Api means also, sun means being. Prakritim, nature. Swam, my own. Adhishthai, situated, ruling. Sambhavami, I manifest, I come into being. Atam Maya, by my own Maya. This is called a Yog Maya. This is, I manifest myself with my own Maya, because I'm the owner of this Maya. Though I am unborn and I'm of perishable nature. Okay? So imperishable. See, Prakriti perishes, God is imperishable. So imperishable in nature. And though I am the Lord of all beings, yet ruling over my own nature, I take birth by my own Maya. This particular verse answers a lot of questions which come to our mind. So the Supreme, by his own perfectly free will, he comes. He manifests himself in a particular embodiment in the world for serving the deluded people like us, to help us. That's why we call him a savior. He doesn't have to come, but he comes because he has compassion for people like us. So it's like if somebody says that, why does he assume a form? He just poses, comes in a form because we can relate to somebody in a form like ours, who can speak to us in our language, who can act like us also, but still differently. See, a mortal like us becomes victimized by ignorance, by avidya. But over here, Lord Krishna says, I am the master of this Maya. We become the servant of the Maya. He is the master of the Maya. Atam Maya. So even though God is unborn, changeless in his nature, Lord of the Prakriti, but keeping his Maya perfectly under his own control, he comes into this world through his own free will, not because of certain karmas. So he is fully conscious of his own divine nature. See, we are here because of there was some kind of a karmic reason for us to be here. So we are compelled by our past karmas. But he is all powerful. That's why they say that in the Vedas also, there are statements that dve vav brahmano rupe bhutam cha eva amurtam cha. Okay, so there's a Murt, form, there is a Amurt, formless. So all powerful God has both aspects to his divine personality, the personal form and the formless aspect. This little statement I gave you, this is from Brihad Aryanak Upanishad. Because sometimes we think God is somewhere else, formless. No, God can take a form also. If he can create this whole universe, the countless galaxies, the solar systems, can't he create a form for himself? And when he takes the form, he doesn't have to forget himself. He still remembers. That's why he's called omniscient and omnipotent. Okay, we forget, he does not forget. To the Lord, the world is not a problem. His personal equipments and their appetites are always perfectly under his own control. He comes to lord over every situation. See, we become the slaves. He doesn't become a slave. He remembers. He knows. So he has a perfect freedom of a God man. Beautifully, he lives his life. So remember, according to the Vedic literature and Bhagavad Gita, God appears in both ways, as a formless Brahm and as a personal God also. These are the dimensions of his personality. And what is the purpose? Why does he come? In the next verse, he says it beautifully. I'm sure all of you have heard this verse countless times in your life. But this is the reason he comes. He says, Yada yada hi dharmasya galani bhavati bharat. Abhyuthanam adharmasya tada atmanam srijami aham. Yada yada, whenever. So it's not only once, whenever. There's no limitation on the number of times he will come. Whenever. He means surely. Dharmasya, of righteousness. Galani, decline. Bhavati is Bharat. That is Arjuna. We know that he belonged to a Bharat dynasty. Arjun. Because he's talking to Arjun directly. Abhyuthanam, rise. Adharmasya, of unrighteousness. Tada means then. Atmanam, myself. Srijami, manifest. Aham, I. Whenever there is a decay of righteousness, O Bharat, and a rise of unrighteousness, then I manifest myself. So that whenever there is a decline of dharma, I create a body for myself, he says. It's almost like when the moral values have declined, standard of life has gone down. When problems have come into this world for people, he says, I come. I come to present myself as a leader of a man to revive, to make a certain change. This is the purpose, that infinite has to come from time to time. He has to wear this matter apparel on the scene of the activity. See, dharam word, sometimes we get lost in this word. Dharam word has been used, in fact, the very first term which was used in the Bhagavad Gita is dharam. The whole book, Bhagavad Gita, is about dharam. What is my dharam? Dharam is definitely prescribed actions that are conducive to our spiritual growth and progress. And the reverse is adharam. If you want to look at it very simple way, something which uplifts us, something which takes us towards our goal, that is adharam. Adharam will make us slide down. We will descend down. So whenever Lord sees that people are descending down, they are not evolving where they need to evolve, he comes to re-establish the dharma. Such a descension of God is called avatar. Avatar. So this is the purpose. And there have been countless avatars. If you look at other scriptures in Bhagavad Gita, we don't have the names of other avatars because this is the purpose of this book is a little different. But if we read Bhagavad Purana, Shiv Purana, Mahabharata, we will see a list of the avatars which have come. Nobody can count the infinite avatars of God. Sure, there are lists, 24 avatars, 10 avatars, 15 avatars. So based upon why they are listing, they have given those names, but there are countless avatars from the beginning of eternity. Especially in Bhagavad Puran, we see that. In Bhagavad Puran, we read that classification of avatars. There is a term called Avesh avatar. Avesh avatar is when God manifests just in an individual soul and acts out just little bit of power for that particular time. Avesh avatar. So for a little time, a God comes. Sage Narad is considered Avesh avatar. He appears. He is eternal, he appears. Buddha is called Avesh avatar. Then there is a Prabhav avatar. That's another list, classification of avatars. Those are the descensions of God with the personal form where he displays some of the divine powers. Like a Hans avatar, Ved Vyas avatar. Those are Prabhav avatars. Or even the Kumars, the 4 Kumars, Sanak, Sanandan, Sanatan and Sanak, those 4 sons of Brahma, they are called Prabhav avatars. Then there's a Vaibhav avatar. When God descends in his divine form, manifests divine power a little bit more. Matsya avatar, Kurma avatar, Varaha avatar. Those are called Vaibhav avatar. Then there is a Parvast avatar. Over here, divine powers are even manifested even more so, like a Narsingh avatar. We saw in Narsingh avatar, Nara and a Singha, lion and a human in one manifestation. Or even a Ram avatar, Krishna avatar, they are called Parvast avatars. So the point I'm trying to make over here is that it's not just only few times God comes, he comes again and again and again. Yada yada hi dharmasya. Okay. Whenever I see the decline of dharma, he says, I come to establish. And then in the next verse, we'll see next week, he further elaborates, why does he come? He says, Paritranaya sadhu nam. To protect the good. Vinashaya cha dushkritam. For the destruction of the wickedness. Dharam sansthapan arthai. To establish a dharma. Sambhavami Yuge. Okay, so we'll start our next week's class with verse number 8. So these two verses normally are read together, sung together, then you can understand the meaning behind all this also more clearly. But I think let's stop it here. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Visheshyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.